I was born in 1989, the year the Berlin Wall came down, but 12 years later, in 2001, there was a much larger crash, one with a shockwave that still echoes in the collective basements of our minds. I, like so many of my contemporaries, grew up in the sunset of that long summer of the West, that reformation of new wealth and prosperity that began in the 80s and ended when the towers came down. I was part of a whole generation who were raised by parents who went to university for free, who could buy a house with dignity on a safe street on one lower middle class salary, who trusted their governments and the media, who had been living through the end of history and were watching everything slowly get better. The boom and bust cycle was over, the arc of progress was bending towards justice, they had the audacity of hope. And so, I did what everyone of my age and background did. I worked hard at school and went to university. And then like everyone of my age and background did, I settled for a minimum wage job in my hometown, wondering how I'd ever pay off the debt, what university and the degree was for. A lot of people of my generation grew bitter and angry and disappointed at the system and society at large. They felt like they'd done everything right, they'd done what their grandparents and parents did, so why hadn't it worked this time? What was a recession? Why were people losing their homes, not moving to bigger ones? What was a credit crunch and quantitative easing? Why was your hometown poorer than it used to be? Why weren't the parks safe anymore? Why were those high street shops you used to walk past all boarded up now? Over the 2000s, qualifications like money, like badly used words, became inflated because they didn't represent the skills, competency, or desirability of what was taught. Governments could enact policies to make universities teach people, but they couldn't force corporations to hire them. Reality began to correct itself. Since then, more of the experiential aspects of life have become inflated. Social media is fiat currency for friendship, and loneliness is the inevitable recession. Desirable scarcity has a quality that we can't imitate. For all the faults of those that came before us, the boomers and Generation X made great art that left them with shared memories that still grounds them today. But where did that energy and impetus go with the millennials? Instead of creating a new artistic or political movement, religiosity was simply recycled and given a scientific-sounding name. The day of reckoning became the climate crisis, the soul became gender identity, charity became effective altruism, flagellating prophets became minimalists in tiny houses, witchcraft became systemic and institutional oppression, purity and holiness became sustainability and equity, meditation and prayer became mindfulness, dietary restrictions were vegetarian and vegan, Ramadan became sober October, temperance became eco-conscious and green living, fasting became intermittent fasting, childless hermits concerned with bringing sin into the world became childless activists concerned with their carbon footprint. Every aspect of religion which was scorned as superstition came back with all of the sanctimony and none of the guilt. Whatever kindling of despondency and nihilism was birthed in 2001 stiffened its mindset when the banks began to fail. The ignition point was sparked in every university and the cultural combustion began. By the summer of 2020, the listless, hyper-political generation had found its rallying cry. It was the burning of the Vanities for irreligious fanatics. If the 20th century was the age of ideology, ours so far has failed to find its replacement. But our first collective memory wasn't Woodstock, Star Wars, or Nevermind. It was the towers coming down.